Hi there. In this video, we will explore how we can hook into the mouse object construction lifecycle. In a nutshell, mouse offers us three lifecycle methods we can use to change and validate the object state. These methods are BUILDARGS, a method that is called before object creation, build, that's called after object creation, and DEMOLISH, that is called during object destruction. Now let's see how we can hook into these methods. Now what we have here is the human class we have worked already before. The only difference is that now we have a name attribute where we simply expect a string, and then in a test file we are creating a new variable of human from a class human and we are setting the name Joe. Now let's look at the BUILDARGS first. Now how we can use the BUILDARGS is we can say around modifier that we looked at before. We provide the method name, which is going to build args, and then we provide the subroutine. What we get in that subroutine are three things. The first thing is going to be original method that is being called, which is going to be the new method to construct the object. The second thing is going to be the class name. And the third thing is actually all the arguments we are passing into the construction of an object, such as, for example, if you look at the test file, that would be name and the value Joe. So let's just store that into args array. And let's get these from the global argument list. And for the time being, let's just log out the variables that we are creating. So let's do warn, dumper, and here let's pass in the original method, class, and backslash arguments just for better visibility. And let's save that. Now here in the test script, as we looked at before, we're just creating a new instance of a human class and we are setting the name to Joe. Right, so if we run the Perl command with our script name, what we're going to see are three things. And the first one is the method that we're calling to create an instance of this class. The second one is the class name. And the third one, we're actually getting a list of values. Now the first value is the name we're setting here, and the second value is Joe. The last thing we are getting here is a warning that our BUILDARGS function did not return a hash reference. Now this is because we are hooking around the BUILDARGS, which expect us to possibly do something with the arguments that we are providing to the constructor. Now here simply we implement a hook around the BUILDARGS method, but we're not really returning a new instance of this class. So what we actually want to do, as a basic example, we can say return class name of the original method, which we can say original, and then just pass in all the arguments that we're getting. If we rerun the script, we're going to see that everything looks fine. Now, why would BUILDARGS be useful? Well, BUILDARGS can be handy in case where you want to do additional modification of arguments passed into constructor. For example, we could say, if someone sets the name to Joe, we actually want to change that to Frank. Now we can do that in a BUILDARGS method because we can modify the arguments before the actual instance of a class is created. Just to make this a little bit easier, we can change the args actually to hash. So every single value we're getting is going to be a name of an attribute set as a key, and then the value is going to be actual value used for that attribute. Just verify that we are actually getting the argument value set as expected. So we can say warn, dumper, make a reference of the args, save that. And now we actually want to make this a hash as well and rerun our script. We're going to see that now we're storing two things. So name is the key for the attribute we're setting from the test script over here. And the value is Joe, which is provided after the fat arrow notation. Alright, so let's say this. We can change the value for this attribute name if it is equal to Joe. So I'm going to say that args name equals Frank if args name and args name equals Joe. Alright, so let's save that. And just for sake of example, I'm going to do warn dumper human. And I'm going to print out the name that we're setting. Let's change this to something like Bruce. Save the script and let's run it. We're going to see that we're printing out Bruce, and that makes sense. We are modifying the BUILDARGS method and we're only setting the name to Frank if it equals to Joe, which is currently not the case. Now let's try to change this to Joe. Save the script, rerun it, and we're going to see that we now actually have the name attribute as Frank, because we are changing the arguments at the time of object construction, and we're changing the name to Frank if the given argument is Joe. Again, BUILDARGS method is very handy if you just want to force a state of the class at the time of the object construction. Alright, let's look at the next lifecycle method. Now, the next one is called build. And build basically is being ran after your object has been created. So when you create an instance of your class. That can be very handy to do some validation at that point, just to make sure that the object state is as you expected. Now the return value of the build method is not being used, so it doesn't really work the same way as BUILDARGS. It's more of a place where you do the final sanity checks. And how you work with the build method is basically you say sub build, and what you get in the build method is the current instance of self. Let's get that from the global argument value. And I'm just going to comment out the BUILDARGS functionality that we introduced, and let's going to add a validation, and we can throw exception through die, where we can say name cannot be Joe if self, and self name equals Joe. Alright, so we know that the build method is ran after the object construction, so we can access the self name attribute, and we're just validating if it's equal to Joe. And if it is equal to Joe, we're just throwing exception through die. Let's maybe change the name to Frank over here. Let's save the script, rerun it. We're going to see that we're printing out name Frank. Now, if we change that to Joe and rerun the script, we're going to see that now we're throwing exception that name cannot be Joe. Because we constructed the object with the argument for the name being Joe, we don't want to allow for a human instance to have a name of Joe. So that's why we're throwing exception. Now again, build method is very handy for validation after an instance of object has been created, but it does not allow you to modify given arguments as the BUILDARGS does. The final lifecycle method we're going to look at is called demolish. As I mentioned before, the demolish is being called at the time of object destruction. Now, for example, a variable where you store an instance of a class goes out of the scope, it's a candidate for garbage collection. So once that memory is being freed up, a method, so that's demolish, is going to get called. Now the demolish can be useful if you want to do just final sanity checks or logging just before an instance of your object gets destroyed. So here, for example, we can just do warn, and I'm going to warn that is being destroyed. Oops, so destroyed, exclamation mark. Now if we go to the test.pl, everything looks good here, and let's run our script. We're going to see that we constructed a new instance of a human class. We printed out a name, which is over here. Then we see this human is being destroyed, called automatically when the instance of the class is no longer needed. And again, the demolish can be very useful just to do some final sanity checks or anything you kind of want to do as a side effect, but there isn't really anything you should do, such as releasing variable memory or anything related to the class itself, because that's going to get automatically done by the Perl's garbage collector. And maybe let's do one last thing just to demonstrate the full lifecycle. So I'm going to uncomment all of these above lifecycle methods that we introduced. I'm going to remove the overriding of the name Frank, and I'm just going to warn a couple of things. The first thing is going to be human is being created. In the build method, I'm going to warn that human has been created. And the last thing, let's just leave it as it is, that human is being destroyed. Alright, if we go to the console and rerun the script, we're going to see a couple of things. So if I go to the test script, the first thing was that we printed out that the human's being created as we were creating a new instance of human class. Then once the instance had been built, we printed out human has been created. So the first one was being created, and then the second one is being created. Then we printed out the name over here that we can see on the third line. The last thing, we're just saying that human is being destroyed, which is being called automatically from this demolish method. Alright, that's it for this video. We looked at how we can hook into the mouse object lifecycle and when would we potentially use these hooks. I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you at the next one.